All right, and I will jump in now on the importance of maintaining your attorney-client privilege during virtual meetings. So the key here is just understand that there's risk associated with recording a client meeting. You have a recorded file that, is it discoverable? If it exists in your hard drive, that's something that could come out later. Always be sensitive to who can hear you speaking. That's one of the benefits if you're using noise canceling headphones that also have a microphone. You can talk quieter. If you're in a room where there's other people present, then you need to be aware and find a way to either get to another room that doesn't have people present who aren't supposed to be there, or find a way to keep it so that you're not talking about a client's important private information where someone else can hear you. You also have to make reasonable efforts to prevent unauthorized access. We have another formal opinion from the ABA here in 2017, which covered secure client communications and basically says when using technology to discuss client information, it's allowed so long as the lawyer has undertaken reasonable efforts to prevent inadvertent or unauthorized access to information relating to the representation. So we want to bring up Zoom bombing. It became less of a problem, but when this glut of video conferencing first started out, Zoom bombing was basically when a stranger to the meeting would drop in on the meeting either through an old link or however they managed to guess what the link and the password was into your Zoom video conferencing. And so Zoom took measures to make sure this wouldn't happen. They employed a bunch of security measures, but it kind of goes to show you how technology is adaptive and how we have to be vigilant so that we can make the changes to secure the information and prevent people from accessing this.
All right, let's talk about some of the downsides that are associated with working from home as opposed to working in a traditional brick and mortar law office environment. One of the problems that we saw people developing in the aftermath of COVID was that they felt isolated. They didn't have the normal interaction that they had with other lawyers, with staff, when they were working from home. Yes, they mitigated it to a certain extent with video conferencing and the like, but it wasn't the same. And psychologists and therapists have taken the opinion, have made the opinion that, offered the opinion, I knew I'd get that right eventually, that being isolated can create psychological issues for people. I think we've all felt isolation at one point in time or another, and it's not a pleasant feeling. It does tend to distract you from focusing on the things you need to be focusing on, and it's something you need to be aware of, and it's something you need to try to protect against happening to you in a work from home situation. I do want to point out to you that ABA Formal Opinion 03-429 talks about mental impairment and points out that mental impairment does not lessen a lawyer's obligation to provide clients with competent representation. Whether or not isolation or the related reactions constitutes mental impairment is a question beyond the scope of this particular program, but certainly arguably it can. Certainly it will create or can create depression that can interfere with providing competent representation. So among the things you need to be careful about is whether or not you are encountering these particular problems. And if you are, you need to take actions to address that, and that may include seeking the help of a professional, a therapist, a psychologist, what have you.
Also, in addition to that opinion that Jeff had just covered, if you are working with other lawyers working from home and you're observing that, then you are obligated to investigate and find out if that is impairing their representation, because they might not know. Lawyers tend to be high-functioning professionals, and they tend to mask any decline in their professional competence longer than other professionals might. And that is even more so when they're working from home and not coming into an office every day. So you have to be more vigilant in your observations.
Yeah, that's especially true of people who are associated with you in the same firm. It's less true if you're talking about a lawyer dealing with on the outside. There are some things that you can do to mitigate, to prevent this from happening. You need to recognize the absence of the traditional office environment, the reduced social action, the blurred work-life boundaries can cause a problem. You need to recognize that the lack of face-to-face social interactions can aggravate that problem. You need to recognize that effective communication and collaboration becomes even more crucial than it would normally be in working remotely. Miscommunication, lack of clarity can lead to frustration and misunderstandings, and lack of face-to-face communication can make miscommunication and lack of clarity more likely to occur than if you have face-to-face communications. Distractions become a real issue when you're working from home. Yes, we have distractions in offices, and a lot of attorneys have televisions in offices, and they have various other things going on and various other activities which can distract them. But working from home creates an even more distracting environment. Household chores, family members, personal devices, pets. There are just lots of opportunities to not focus on your work. So you need to be careful about that, and you need to make sure that you stay focused on your work. Some of the things that you can do to protect yourself: an honest self-assessment. Use thoughtful and honest self-analysis and common sense to assess yourself and your ability to cope with downside issues. It's interesting to me that time passes, society evolves. We now have all of these issues going on, and we're back to the ancient Greeks who said, "Know thyself." Shakespeare said the same thing. "To thine own self be true, for thou canst not be false than unto any other man." So, it really is know yourself. Be honest with yourself. Don't look at yourself and say, "Hey, I'm wonderful. No problem. I can deal with this," because maybe it's not quite being dealt with as successfully as you would like. You need to embrace flexibility. One benefit of remote work is the flexibility it offers. You can integrate activities promoting well-being into your workday. You don't need to sit at your desk and work from 9 in the morning until whenever. Technically, you didn't do that or necessarily do that in a brick and mortar office, but a lot of people did. You can work for an hour and take a break, go do something else. If you want to, you can finish your work in the evening. That's something I started doing even when I worked in a brick and mortar office. I discovered when I was a very young lawyer, my clients didn't care if I did their work at 9 in the morning or 10 o'clock at night, as long as it was ready when they needed it. And that enabled me to work in an office, take time off and do personal things, do social volunteer work, and still be very effective in my practice. And that same process works very well from home. Maintain your social connections. Actively seek opportunities for social interaction with colleagues, friends, and families. Now that we've opened up again after COVID, we can actually have face-to-face meetings and social interaction in person. During COVID, we were using a lot of video conferencing to accomplish those goals. But recognize that they're important, pay some attention to them. If you don't already have hobbies, think about developing a few. If you have some, think about doing some additional work with them, cultivating them. Do things that will satisfy you, that bring you some fulfillment, that are not related to your work, just because. Self-care, you need to prioritize self-care activities to nurture mental and emotional well-being. Social support, you need to have a support network. Stay connected with friends and family and loved ones through phone calls, video chats, in-person meetings, if that's feasible. And a lot of people have relatives that live in other parts of the country or in other countries. And even without COVID, it's not easy to get together with them. The evolution of video conferencing has made it possible for people to get together with relatives that they have all over the country, all over the world. and I'll give you a real simple example. My wife is Italian. Her parents both came over here from Italy. She has relatives that we're very close with that live in Genoa, Italy. And, it used to be telephone calls to keep close to them. Now it's video conferences. And it just makes things much easier. Establish boundaries. You need to set boundaries between work and personal life. It's like when you're dealing with your trust funds, you don't want to commingle with your personal assets. The same is true with respect to the boundaries between your personal and work life. You try not to commingle. You want to keep them as separate as you possibly can. And that will help you deal with them effectively. It will help you maintain a reasonable social balance, a reasonable mental balance, and it will make it easier for you to move along in a successful and professional manner despite the changing paradigm.